Welcome to The Real Life Buyer. In this podcast, you will discover interviews with procurement and technical experts, business owners, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders. These experts will help you to develop and grow, accelerate your career, improve your business, save money, and buy smart. Now introducing The Real Life Buyer, Dave Barr.
Hello and welcome to The Real Life Buyer. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to Jerry Fu from Houston in Texas. Before starting his coaching business, Jerry completed a biology degree at Rice University, which led on to pharmacy school at the University of Tennessee Memphis. After teaching a leadership workshop in 2012, he became inspired to become a pharmacy manager. His coaching services include one-to-one coaching, group workshops, and keynote presentations in conflict management. In life, business, and now social media, conflict situations regularly occur. It feels to me that conflict appears to be no less prevalent in today's society than at any time before. So what is it that we are not learning from generation to generation? In today's podcast, I'm particularly interested in exploring conflict from three angles: personal conflicts with colleagues, conflicts with customers, and conflicts with suppliers, and the tips and techniques we may use to avoid or resolve them. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Jerry onto the podcast. Hello, Jerry.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody.
Hi. Great to have you on board. And we were just discussing before we started recording of the challenges in the world of today. So let's hope we can wrong some of the right some of the wrongs that we're having to deal with. So
absolutely.
Again, thanks very much for joining me today.
Mm-hmm.
When did you become interested in conflict resolution, and what drew you to study this subject?
Yeah, I think what drew me is the fact that I couldn't run from it. It found me. If I didn't look for it and was proactive, I still got thrown into situations that were like sudden death. Like one situation randomly that I dealt with was when I was director of a church class, and I found out the day after I officially started my term as director, I found out that one of the guys, one of the newer guys in the class, was actually sexually harassing like some of the women, and so now all of a sudden I have to go kind of, chase down this fire and put it out. So it's like, I don't have a choice, right? I have to do something, and it doesn't matter how qualified or confident you are. You're just like, no, I have to do something. And then, other stories that come along is recognizing, hey, my own personal struggles with conflict, whether it's, in church volunteer situations or roommates with, habits I disagreed with, or employees underperforming, just helping clients who are dealing with bad bosses. It's all over the place. And so I realized quickly that this was my niche, with the help of a lot of friends. They said, hey, this is obviously something that's personal to you, and you have a heart for taking useful information about conflict already, because I'm clearly not the first one to deal with this, but to build on what's already there in a way that's unique and effective for me and the people I work with. Has been a joy and satisfaction for sure.
Yeah, you get a lot of fulfillment from resolving the conflicts, I guess. So it's a positive. It's coming out of a negative.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So am I correct in saying that not all conflicts are necessarily negative? Do you mind explaining where positive conflicts can be considered beneficial and rewarding, and how these should be encouraged and managed?
Yeah, there is unhealthy conflict where, there are broken expectations and there's defensiveness and finger pointing and blame because people just refuse to change. And then an example of healthy conflict, right? Simple one is personal, between who you are now and who you want to be, right? Because that's a healthy conflict, because there's this tension between, I need to grow and improve, but at the same time, if you're already pretty successful, right, you kind of want to stay in that space. And then in business is true as well. One thing we talk about with the world of work is that imagine 4 quadrants. And so you have teamwork, you have innovation, you have systems, and you have results. And the teamwork and results are kind of catty corner to each other, right? And so you see that team, you see that pull where it's like, okay, on one hand, we want high morale. On the other hand, we need results. Like, we can't just have people feeling good about themselves. Like, you need to balance, because if you don't have teamwork, people get burnt out if they just focus on results. But if you get the results, but people are getting burnt out, right, then they're not going to stick around. So you see this tension there. Same thing with innovation and systems, right? On one hand, a business needs to keep growing and they need to keep finding new revenue streams. But then at the same time, the processes that help you, keep things moving the way they are now, right? They kind of tend to stay they tend to stay comfortable until you have no choice, right? So you have these dynamics that are, all of those are good, and yet at the same time, there's tough moments you have between good things and great things.
Yeah, I guess when you're looking at either developing a product or bringing in new things, then people are naturally have opinions. And if everybody just agrees with the boss, then you'll end up with something that may or not be the best it could be. And so having that healthy tension, I would say necessarily the word conflict, but people challenging each other, challenging their concepts, their ideas, their thoughts, rather than just accepting them just to keep the peace, may not be the best thing for the business or for the product that you're trying to bring out. So I tend to think of things in that way, because that's what I'm fairly familiar with. Is that reflecting in what you just said, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. The point is not that everyone has to agree, but that they, even if they disagree, it's done respectfully, and they're able to put aside their differences because they understand what's most important and essential for the company's health and growth. A simple example is, when at one point on my day job as a pharmacist, we have daily huddles. And so people, we do this every morning to get people coordinated, get settled. We figure out what's the most important things to take care of. And then, we proceed. And at one point we had a technician who said, I don't like these daily huddles. I'll see the point. Because we were earlier, before we hired this technician, we used to have only weekly meetings, and then you just watch like the agenda just accumulate, and then when by the time the weekly meeting rolled around, you had like 20 things you had to address, and then it took away time from phones. Like people, we keep getting interrupted, and it was just like, okay, no, we need to do a daily wash to stay ahead of these things. But then this girl was like, no, she wasn't. She was hired after we had switched to the daily meetings, but before the weekly meetings, especially, it's like, no, we just talk about the same things every day. I don't see the point. Like, we shouldn't have to have this every day. But the funny thing is, the other technicians overrode her because they said, well, you weren't around when we did the weekly meetings, and those were horribly inefficient. So, as much as you disagree with them, we're going to trust that you're going to understand why these are better than the alternatives that you prefer. So. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah. So let's consider first conflicts in the workplace. What would you say are some of the differences in the approach one should consider when dealing with a conflict? Let's say, on one hand, with your boss, it's always going to be more challenging, should we say, versus that with a colleague. And perhaps you've got some personal experiences there. You just touched on one there.
Yeah, it's with peer-to-peer. I think it's much easier, simply because you're not coming from an angle of compliance and conformity. You're just saying, "Hey, I'm just trying to look out for you, right? Here's what I'm seeing. What are you seeing, right? And then here's what I'm seeing, and I this is, could you please do this differently? Because I'm just looking out for you, right? We're trying to protect each other. Let's do that." If you're going from a boss to a subordinate, right, you have to be gentle. Like, I've learned this the hard way, where if you go in thinking, oh, they're just screwing up and I got to hold them accountable, you might be right, but it may not bring out the best in them. One saying I always use to keep in mind is when John Maxwell says, people don't always do as expected, but they always do as inspected. And so I just use the metaphor of shining a flashlight on, what I need done. And so I'd say, something simple like, hey, where are we with this? And they'll say, oh, well, here. It's like, okay, well, hey, here's the expectation. How are we doing, with this deadline for this project or something like that, right? Because it looks like I'm concerned about this and this and this, how are you going to handle it, right? And so I'm just asking questions rather than assuming that they're just not, moving this as fast as I would like them to. When it comes, though, to dealing with a boss who, you have to kind of deal with, what I like to say is you have to sell the benefits of having this conversation, right? You have to show the boss that you are looking out for his best interest as well. So when you say something like, hey, boss, I respect you, I think highly of you, they wouldn't, have you here unless you were, good at what you did. And, here's what I'm noticing, or here's what I'm hearing, some of the pushback, some of the frustrations with your leadership style or something like that, this isn't meant as an insult. And you just make that very clear. Like you have to exercise a lot more tact, right? And you don't say, but you say, and here's what I think would help go a long way in terms of like restoring the people's trust in you, or, ratcheting up the level of respect, anything like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just touched on the point you said, don't say the word but, things like however, because obviously they're negatives. And that's an interesting use of your words there. So can you expand on how to avoid those kind of almost like automatic reactions?
Yeah, when you switch but with and, like a simple example, right? Let's say a parent is looking over her son's grades, right? A mom's looking at her son's grades, and you could say something like, you got an A in math, and that's good, but you got a C in English, and that's bad, right? Or that needs improvement. And the kid, you can just see him drop because you see the other shoe, like, oh, he's building me up. And then all of a sudden now we're getting to like the tough part. Or what if the parent said, you got an A in math, and that's good. And if you, work at the C that you got in English, I'm sure you can get that to be an A as well, right? And now the kid's like, okay, we acknowledge that this is short of the standard, and she also is showing confidence that I can improve and get to the standard that she wants me to, right? And so now that even as we address deficiencies, it is done with a level of reassurance and encouragement, so that people don't, get paranoid about, well, whether they're really upset with me about.
Yeah, it's a subtle difference, but the impact is quite profound to the person receiving that kind of criticism, I guess, but in a soft way. So, yeah. I like that. Now, one thing that's really difficult, I guess, particularly for people in retail, let's say, for example, is when you have a customer that isn't very happy with the situation, and maybe they've gone away, they've taken some products home and it hasn't worked, or there's something defective in there. And of course, they're rolled up right up to your face and say, look, I'm really unhappy about this product. What are you going to do about it? There's a lot of tension. You get a tirade of abuse perhaps sometimes, where people have worked themselves up on the journey back, and they're going to have it out with you. So what advice can you suggest would be a good tactics for the employee to bring in to counter those kind of approaches?
Yeah. I always laugh because when people say, oh, I love people, I said, you've never worked a retail job in your life, have you? Right. The first thing I've learned, the cardinal rule is that the only way to win an argument in this situation is to diffuse it. If you basically tell the customer why they're wrong about whatever situation they're in, like that's a lose for everybody, because not only have you lost a customer, even if they're difficult ones, now, that's less revenue for the company. And now, someone's job's going to get cut because you don't have revenue to cover that job. And it's not to condone bad behavior, because ultimately, like if you're a small business owner or something like that, and you say, no, this client is not worth my time, you're more than welcome to dismiss them and replace them, hopefully with a better client. But if you are in a situation where you say, hey, I'm working for like Nordstrom or, these other chains that are basically like, hey, you got to take care of the customer no matter how unfair. The first thing is to remind them and assure them, hey, show empathy, right? I understand why you're upset, or I can, even if I don't agree with it, I understand you are upset about the situation, and I am on your side to help you find a solution for that. And so that's what I've done in my situations where, customers or patients are upset, hey, I was supposed to get this yesterday. And it's like, okay, I'm sorry this happened, right? Apologize. You don't have to apologize for anything that isn't your fault. You just need to apologize that the situation is not up to expectation. And when you say that, that usually helps kind of lessen the tension, right? To say, hey, okay, I wasn't involved in the situation, but here's what I'm willing to do to make this right? Own the solution is the slogan I'm going to use here, because the first thing people need to realize is that, okay, if you're on this side, okay, apologize, right? Not out of because you have a script, but because you honestly have compassion for this person to say, hey, I am sorry that for whatever reason, the brand of my company is not living up to its reputation. And, I want to do what's right. ask for time to say, hey, it's going to take me an hour or two to look into this situation. Can I call you back in 2 hours? Because when you kind of like downplay the urgency of the situation, if you can, and buy yourself time, people are going to give you that because they understand that you're working toward a solution, and they understand that, trying to fix something in the next 15 minutes is unrealistic, especially if it's something you don't know anything about. The sooner you show them, hey, this is what I'm going to do to help resolve this problem. When you give them a plan and you give them a timeline, they're much more agreeable and cooperative, right? When they understand that you are doing everything you can to make the situation right.
Yeah, it's kind of you said the word diffusing the situation. You're just kind of, I'd say, absorbing the blows, but you're deflecting them and calming people down. You're putting some water on the situation, I guess, as best you can.
Yep.
And you say empathy is a key word you just raised there. Show that you're interested. Don't be dismissive. Those are the kind of things where the customer will stay on side, hopefully. And as you said, then you went on to say you demonstrating that you're going to take action and try and resolve it as quickly as possible. So some good points there. Okay, so when we think of conflict, we often think in terms of how we feel and react. However, in the global environment we live in now, conflict often arises between cultures, as we often do not share the same beliefs or social norms. So before you engage with somebody from a culture that you're not familiar with, how do you prepare and plan for that meeting?
Yeah, great question. What I've learned now in this global connected world is that if people are ignorant or uninformed, it is not for lack of information, right? It's not hard to go on Wikipedia and say, hey, I don't know anything about Cameroon, right? Or other countries that say, you know what, I just need to look this up and I just need to, learn some basic things about it. And then once I have this information, right, go to people who are more knowledgeable than you about this country or this culture and say, hey, what are your takes on this? What are your best practices in order to build relationships well with this culture, right? A common theme among the conversations I've had is I've professed the need for humility and the importance of humility, that people would value humility, to say, hey, you know what? I don't know everything. And right, I can do something about that. And I'm going to keep exploring and stay curious so that when I do meet these people, right, I am fully prepared. I can ask meaningful questions to show that I've done my homework and I've done my research to make sure that this business deal goes well, or that these friendships are going well, and that, I show them that they are important.
Yeah, I raised that particularly because I'm in a position where I meet lots of different cultures. I happen to buy in products and services from all around the world. So I'm regularly involved with meetings with suppliers from Asia to the US to Europe. So that's why I was quite interested to know how you deal with that. I've had to deal with so many different cultures, and the way people react, it's quite striking, the differences from one place to another. You find the Italian culture is, a little bit more expressive than perhaps some, and others are very introverted, certainly at first. Yeah. So touching on the supplier thoughts there, and I obviously then will have challenges when I spend time with suppliers, because not always are the suppliers performing as maybe your business wants them to. It could be late delivery, poor quality. The subject of price is always going to be one where there's going to be some tension, shall we say.
Of course.
And sometimes these discussions can end in a kind of deadlock. They're not often usually too explosive conflicts, usually lots and lots of discussion. But when there's deadlock there, what sort of tactics and strategies would you suggest one could use to bring out a positive outcome from a difficult situation between businesses? Yeah,
great question. Tough situation for sure. And I'm sure a lot of people are looking for advice and guidance with this. I'll give an example that happened recently, actually. Fresh material for your podcast, Dave.
Fantastic.
So I had FedEx is one of the suppliers that we use with my day job. And what's I got on a call with my account manager and his new boss because they noticed that we weren't doing nearly as much business with them as we had previously. And, they wanted to know how they could get some of that business back. And so I explained to them, hey, here's the situation that really kind of stuck in my mind. So at one point, we used your courier to deliver medications, pain medications, for a patient after surgery, to an address we couldn't use our other couriers for. And so we get a call from him a couple of days later saying he never received his pain medications. Keep in mind, this is after his surgery, so he's in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And, when I look into it and I see that the tracking number says that he signed for it in person. And so I tell him this and he goes, no, I never got it. I got this other medication, but I didn't get this one. And so I call FedEx and I say, hey, what's going on with this? And they said, oh, well, it turns out the driver used the COVID waiver. The document is saying that he signed it. And I'm saying, well, this is unacceptable because the patient didn't actually get the medication. So the driver either just didn't try hard enough or he just copped out or he may have taken the meds for himself. I don't know. And so I filed an appeal. And FedEx says, we've gotten your appeal. All the documentation on our part says that we did our job. So we're going to deny this. And I tell them, how much business do you expect me to do with you when this is the kind of response I get? Right? They're like, oh, well, yeah, we can see why you're upset. It's just like, okay, I'm glad you have the empathy. And what will you do about it? Right. And so I've learned that you have to kind of be like this powerful mirror and, it'll be uncomfortable. You have to say, hey, look, guys, I'm not mad at you. Like the account manager, I told him, I was like, the account manager's been great. He's been very helpful. He's gone the extra mile whenever we ask big favors of him. And you're representing a system that is broken. How much business do you expect me to give you when the system is still broken? You can apologize all you want, right? And so part of it, I think, comes back to your original question, right? Maybe you have to reset things and say, hey, guys, what if we had a magic wand? What would make this situation perfect, right? Money is a barrier to entry, and yet money is a statement of value, right? Both are true, and you have to navigate this tension. So, what would it take for each company to say, hey, how do we want and demonstrate we want what's best for our clients and not just for ourselves? And, I'm not here to give a number. That's different. That's different it depends on the currency you use, right? In this global economy, the number is different for everybody. And it is more important that you think about the intent behind your negotiation than not. I read something recently that was really helpful, where you have to determine whether or not your negotiation is competitive or collaborative. If it's collaborative from the start, great. If it's competitive, you cannot afford to be collaborative, because if you do, they will go and make you concede until you have nothing left. And so it was just really sobering to know that, hey, you know what, as soon as you sense that someone is being competitive and not collaborative, you have to, there are tactics you can use to get them to stop. And I'm going to have to reveal that in another, episode, because that's proprietary, right? but that's the point, right? You want to, on one hand, stand your ground. And at the same time, you have to show that, hey, I'm standing my ground because this is what allows us to be the best, supplier for you that we can be. Even if we risk losing you to a cheaper competitor, we know that we have to trust that people see the value that we bring because of the higher price that we have to justify. But anyway, it's a complicated subject for sure. But hopefully that there's some good starting points for a discussion there.
Yeah. How often do you see the use of escalating your issue to higher management as being a common practice, or when do you think that's the most appropriate time to use that tactic? Oh yeah,
great question. I think it depends on how responsive the person is to your feedback that you're confronting, right? Because the rule I use with my day job has been really funny. A lot of them don't like conflict. And so they'll go straight to me and say, hey, Jerry, can you talk to her about, this problem I'm having? Because I don't think it's fair, And then I'll go there and I'll tell them and say, well, that's not fair, They're lying or whatever. And now I'm being a bad referee, right? And so I tell them, I said, no, the design is that you guys, hash it out 3 times, try 3 times before coming to me. If you haven't solved it after 3 times, okay, now get me involved. Okay. All right. Let's arbitrate in person. Everyone's there. And if I'm still unable to help come up with a solution, okay, let's turn to outside help. And so basically, I think the best practice is just to say, okay, it starts at ground level. You guys need to figure out a way to be adults and want what's best for each other and figure out a way to work all together. And only then, and set a tripwire, because you want like 3 or 4. It doesn't have to be legalistic, but you need to have some limit to say, okay, like we've talked 3 or 4 times, we're still not getting anywhere. Okay, let's get some advice. Because if you say, I don't like the way she looked at me, I'm going to get HR involved, right? No one's going to be happy. So yeah, I think just don't be overly sensitive. Like be aware and observant, but don't be overly don't be so like sensitive where you feel like they wrapped you on the wrist and all of a sudden, boom, I have to get my bosses involved with every little thing, because they don't have time for that either.
Yeah. Okay. One of the big changes in recent years, certainly in the last 12 to 18 months, has been the explosion of video conferencing and, of course, social media. So the forms of engagement that's happening is so different from the physical interaction that we're used to. And being humans, we need to feed off a whole range of signals and mannerisms that we might not be able to access through these other mediums. So what do you see as the primary issues, and how can we reduce the potential for the confusion and the mixed messages?
Yeah, the situation keeps coming up again and again for some reason. And happy to address it. I think the main thing is, what the irony is that we noticed that screen time was causing problems, right? People just being disengaged because they're on their phones, they're not being present at the dinner table with their families, things like that. And I mean, at the heart of it, I believe that in-person human connection is always going to be what to strive for. And so ironically, in COVID, when we realized, hey, we can still connect because we have screens, but then, there's a lot of underdeveloped social skills because of this. And, I think one experiment that is simple to do is just to have, a webinar on these things, right? To say, hey, demonstrate right now, hey, you have to look out for tone. You have to look out for, eye contact, and explain it in real time as you're doing the webinar over Zoom or things like that. And so that, because I'm always going to say safety first, right? If at any point, meeting in person is a risk, it's never worth that. And so, but to be more aware of these conversations and to at least give people that information and let them try it out for themselves, so they have that aha moment to say, oh, I can't just text them when I'm angry because there's no tone. I need to draw out a conversation that will involve tone, and I can hear tone, observe body language, and understand what they're actually expressing and not just what they're saying.
Yeah, I find that quite challenging in the respect that quite often you'll find people, you've organised a conference call, but there are always some that don't switch their cameras on. And that's when you are struggling. You might hear the voice, but you're not sure exactly how they're really behaving. Are they fully engaged in the conversation? You mentioned eye contact earlier on. Obviously, you don't get the same level of eye contact when you're on a screen with multiple people, of course. And so you're totally reliant on the tone. And when you're dealing with different cultures with different accents, sometimes you can't pick up whether the tone is a positive one or a negative one. So I think there's going to be more confusion sometimes coming out than you would certainly have if you're face-to-face. Because you're not picking up on that. Yeah.
And you just have to, I think just the simple response is like, just get curious about that. Hey, can you say that again? Right. Just to say, okay, I'm noticing this. I don't want, and then, you tell them, hey, I want to be sure I'm hearing exactly what you're saying and how you're saying it. Could you repeat that? Or, I detected its tone and, it kind of like, made me curious. Could you elaborate on what you're saying? Right. And to not just say, oh, okay, I'm confused, and let that, I can't process anything. But there's a level of prioritization there, right? Like you can't, it is like, if you have like 16 or 20 people, like it's silly to think that you're going to catch everything. But if you are able to discern, okay, hey, there's 1 or 2 things, this might be potential for a problem. Okay, let me address that promptly. Right. Yeah.
I was thinking of the Covey term, seek to understand and be understood.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that's so important that people recognize that those on the other end of this electronic device are somewhat limited in what they can pick up and detect. You don't see what people are doing with their hands or their body, and so on and so forth. So I think you're exactly right. It's to test and just to make sure that your understanding of what you think is being said is actually what's meant to be said. So really good. I think certainly recently there's been an escalation in conflict. And of course, over the centuries, that's always been the case with the humanity, shall we say. Do you feel that there's an increase or a decrease in the conflict situations occurring? Do you know if there's any sort of rhythm or pattern to how these things occur over generation to generation?
I think the general trend is, I think about Thomas Friedman, and the world is flat, and just talks about how this world, just continues to stay connected. And I don't know about you, Dave, but for me, where there's people, there's politics. And so the more people you meet, the more chances you have to disagree with somebody. And basically, now that we are more connected than ever, you're going to see more than enough conflict, right? There are more than enough trolls on the internet, right? Like there's social media stuff that, is causing suicide, kids to commit suicide because like they're getting, attacked online in ways that they wouldn't have 20 or 30 years ago. And so, on one hand, like the technology, it's like, Covey says, technology is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master, right? And in this case, as long as you're being bombarded with social media and other distractions that you weren't otherwise, there will be conflict.
Yeah. It's just curious to see how things develop. You seem to go through periods where there seems to be a lot more aggression happening around the world, and then it goes quiet for a while. I'm not sure if there's ever been any studies done on that over the centuries. Just curious there.
Yeah.
We touched on retail a bit earlier on, but generally, do you think there is sufficient conflict management training being offered in our workplace, in our education systems? And if so, what changes would you recommend for the future to improve the education to our people?
Yeah, I tell people that training systems can't move the heart, right? You can know all the great conflict resolution techniques, but if your heart's not in it to really serve people and to really add value to your company, and it sounds cliche to make a world a better place, but that's basically what we're asking people to do. And as long as you have a degree of control that's inappropriate, or people just wanting status or other things, because they don't want to deal with this, then that's where the problems lie. Because I can think of examples of really poor conflict resolution, right? Like FedEx, not to harp on them, but we know that whenever we call the customer service department, they follow a script. They're very much, it's about the script and not actually teaching them principles on how to solve problems well, right? They're just like, oh, sorry. Okay, no. Okay, I'm sorry. It's like, no, you already said that line. Like, that's not helpful. But I mean, if we were to change anything, I mean, I would think of the book that comes to mind is a book called Humble Inquiry by Edgar Schein. And, just learning to say, hey, how do I build this relationship well? Because if you learn how to build a relationship well, you're probably going to be able to resolve conflict well, right? So it starts with the relationship before you ever get to conflict. And, the stakes with conflict resolution, you don't have a relationship with the person, but you need to build one quickly in order to show them, hey, I'm someone you can trust and someone you can know and like and respect. So I think if they shifted the focus just a little bit instead of just the technique, because the plan doesn't mean anything if you don't understand the reason behind the plan, right? And to give people more autonomy in how they want to handle things, as opposed to just saying, hey, you need to read the script. If you don't have any other ideas, okay, follow the script. But if you are able to think at a higher level and kind of improv like jazz, right, off the main themes, I think everyone feels empowered when they feel like, oh, I have some level of, ownership in this.
Yeah. So I find it sort of quite interesting thinking of younger people today, very much into their mobile phones and all the devices. And you mentioned the word relationships. I wondered if those bonds, those relationships that formed when you're young are just not as strong now as they used to be. I didn't have a mobile phone. I'm far too old to have a mobile phone when I was a kid. Because, we were out all day getting in the dirt and, sort of bonding with each other. We weren't texting and messaging and doing all this other stuff. And so I'm wondering if some of the bonds that were there those days are being lost now a little bit. And is that contributing to perhaps some of the breakdown in society in some way? And then the other thing I think of at school, and I don't know if you think the same, is that I don't remember ever being trained or educated in how to deal with a conflict situation, other than being told off by your teacher or something to that effect. You were never shown or taught about what things are appropriate and inappropriate, what tools and mechanisms to use to deflect some situations. You just went at it in the schoolyard, basically.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Do you think that's something that we could learn from and help young people today, so the next generation comes through with some form of thought and empathy and understanding?
Yeah. These are some great areas to address, Dave. So thank you. So to answer the first question, you're absolutely right. When you are on your phone, like being pinged with distractions, you are not present, right? It was a lot easier to be present when there's fewer distractions, whether it's having dinner with your family, right? Even if kids would want to bring books to the table, right? They're like, oh, I know, I'm glad you're enjoying your book. Put it away for now. Mom and dad want to just hang out and enjoy this meal with you, right? Because I can think of the times when I first started texting on a more regular basis, and I just saw how compulsive I was with my phone. And it wasn't fair to the people that I was trying to have dinner with and meet up with, because like the whole point was to be present with them, enjoy their conversation and their contributions. And so when people are intentional and they realize, hey, my indulgences and distractions are my choice, and I can choose to shape my environment in a way that keeps them from getting in the way of things and what's truly important. I think if we empower them on that level to recognize, hey, you know what, distractions are everywhere. Marketing companies, everyone's using distractions in some way to get your attention. And with integrity, we're going to show you how to filter those out so that you don't get bogged down by them. So that's absolutely the case. And then, I think about my own education, and if it weren't for the fact that my mom made me read, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? I don't know where I would have gotten any idea of how to navigate social situations more effectively. And I would love to see a class, that everyone goes through, like in college or so. And I understand that's far from an ideal solution, but at least you said, hey, we made this a priority enough to make a class for you. So, at least go through it and see how that affects, how things work out for you afterwards. So I agree with that. Just, hey, have a whole class on conflict resolution and have people, give case studies and say, hey, try out these principles, see how it goes for a week and see what you think.
Yeah. I sort of enjoyed the times at school when you did have these sort of open classes and everybody would start to debate a topic that sometimes a teacher would bring in, and the engagement from all the students was incredible in comparison to when you're just being taught and you're sat there writing things down. Personally, I think kids now get education, let's say, at a young age now, and certainly in the UK, of class of sex education, and they're being taught about these things, but there's such other things to be taught on. And I think conflict is one of the ones that should be considered, personally, anyway.
Amen.
Okay, before I ask you one final question, because you've been on for a little while now, and you're probably gasping for a cup of tea or a coffee.
It's all right.
How would people get in contact with you and look you up, basically?
Yeah. I have a profile on LinkedIn, so feel free to find me there. My official company website is www.adaptingleaders.com. And from there, just book a free or complimentary 30-minute phone call. Just tell me what you're working on, or tell me your story. And, just whatever I can do to be a resource and encouragement or a friend for you, please let me know. And whether you want to hire me officially as a coach, or involve your company in one of my workshops, at the very least, depending on what kind of budget you have, my blog is free, the call is complimentary, and you're more than welcome to ask me what books I would line up for you if you want to get better in this space, or just improve yourself as a person, as a leader.
Brilliant. And I'll put that obviously in the show notes, Joe, so everybody can pick up on that. And you mentioned the coaching. Is coaching like a day? Is it 2 days? What kind of things are involved? Do people role play? What sort of things would people expect to get engaged with?
Yeah, great question. So coaching typically is done in 1 hour sessions, whether you want to pay as you go or you want to set up a 3-month or 6-month commitment, depending on how frequent the calls are. It's up to you. But the coaching sessions will typically involve a lot of questions. And the clients also are the ones who set the agenda, because I tell everyone, hey, you are the expert on your life, right? I have an idea of how I can help you. I'm more than happy to open up my toolbox of books and resources and stories. And it's up to you to decide how those are useful to you. And so, coaching can involve reflections on, self-limiting beliefs, things holding you back. Or they can say, hey, I need a plan and strategy and accountability to make sure that I actually follow through on some things coming up. So it can cover a range, but the main thing is, I'd say, our awareness and discovery, and then forwarding the action. And so as long as we are able to move you in the direction you want to, that's the most important thing.
Great. That's interesting to know. So, okay, then I won't take you up for much longer. One more question then.
Go for it.
Put you on the spot a little bit then. What would you recommend if you're going to say sort of top few strategies to bring into play now? If you were in a situation, you were taken into a conflict situation unexpectedly. Let's say, you're out driving your car and you have a car accident, a minor little bit of damage, and somebody comes out and they're full of rage. What would be some effective ways to calm down an unexpected and perhaps a shocking conflict situation that arises at the spur of a moment?
You have to use humor. And it's easy to think about this hypothetical, but because I've been in minor car accidents, and but I remember when a lady cut into my lane when she was trying to squeeze by, ended up breaking off a mirror. We pulled over, and you say something like, this isn't normally how I make friends, right? And then this isn't normally how I meet people, right? But hey, part of it again is just having compassion for the person. Just, hey, remember, hey, okay, can you assume positive intent, even if it's, hurtful, even if it ends up with bad consequences? You're just like, she didn't deliberately cut me off, right? She probably wasn't aware, things like that, and say, okay, hey, you know what? Shoot, to focus on the lesson and not the loss, right? Because the sooner you go back to the lesson, okay, and you take ownership, okay, what could I have done differently? Even if this isn't my fault, what could I have done differently? When you focus on the solution, let me back up a second. So let's say, car crash situation. Okay, diffuse it with humor. Hey, you know what? I'm so glad I have an excuse to use my insurance, right? Otherwise, I get my money's worth out of my policy, right? And just show them, hey, you know what? I'm going to be a good sport about this. And hey, nice to meet you, even if it's under a less than ideal circumstances. What's the quickest way to make this better, right? And that's usually what I have to ask them. What's the easiest solution that we can implement? And so now you shift from confrontation to collaboration, which is another one of my key, I think, slogans when it comes to conflict, to say, okay, are we on the same side of the table now? Now that we've engaged, okay, let's move to the same side of the table and let's work on a solution together. Hey, okay, we got to call the cops. Okay, we got to file a claim. All right. How do I stay in touch with you after we get this to be sure that all the paperwork gets worked out and everything gets repaired, right? Because at this point, you can get mad and indignant if you want, and that's perfectly justified, just as long as you understand the consequences that may not be helpful to the situation.
Yeah, so keeping calm, again, back to diffusing the situation, bringing people on side, the use of the word collaborate, and clearly you're going to work things out together. So, I like those things. That's brilliant. Well, Jerry, I've taken plenty of your time. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really interesting and inspiring discussion. Thank you very much.
Glad to help. Have a great day, guys.
Cheers. Thanks, Jerry. Bye. So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it and it's given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. If you are a purchasing or a supply chain professional, business owner or director, come and join my Facebook group, the Purchasing and Supply Chain Community Hub, a safe place to engage with like-minded, friendly people. See you soon. Bye.